Tell me something true, not something safe, not something you think I want to hear, not something you've rehearsed because it lands well at dinner parties. Something actually genuinely uncomfortably true. Can you do it? Most people can't, not because they're dishonest by nature, but because somewhere along the way, through years of social feedback, small corrections, subtle punishments for saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, they learned that the truth is dangerous, that it costs something, that the world runs smoother on comfortable fictions, and everyone benefits from keeping them intact. And here's the thing, in the short term, that's not entirely wrong. The lie that smooths the moment, the omission that avoids the argument, the version of events that makes everyone feel better, it works. Sometimes for a day, sometimes for a year, sometimes for longer. You get away with it. You move on. The problem disappears, but you don't disappear. You were there when you lied. You know what you said, and something in you, something that keeps very careful score, registered every word. This video is about that score, about what happens when it runs too high, about why telling the truth is not just a moral preference, but a structural requirement for a life that doesn't eventually collapse under the weight of everything you said instead of the truth. And it's about something bigger than personal honesty. It's about what happens to a society that decides some truths are too dangerous to be spoken, and what grows in the silence where honest conversation used to be. Let's get into it. The lie you told once. It started small. It always starts small. That's the thing about lies. They don't announce themselves as the beginning of a problem. They announce themselves as a solution. A quick, clean, painless solution to an immediate problem that would have been awkward to address honestly. You told someone what they wanted to hear. You softened something that needed to be said plainly. You let an assumption stand uncorrected because correcting it would have cost you something. Comfort, approval, the path of least resistance, and it worked. Nobody found out. The moment passed. You moved on, but something happened that you probably didn't notice at the time. You updated your model of the world. Slightly, almost invisibly, but you did. You learned that lies can work, that reality can be managed, that what people believe is more important than what's true. And the next time a similar situation came along, slightly bigger, slightly higher stakes, the lie was a little easier to reach for because you'd already proven to yourself it was available. This is the mechanism. Not dramatic corruption, not a conscious decision to become dishonest, just a very gradual rewiring. A slight but consistent preference for the comfortable version of things over the true one, reinforced every time you get away with it, repeated until it becomes automatic. And automatic is where it gets dangerous, because the problem isn't only what you've said, it's who you're becoming in the saying of it. Who you become. This is the part nobody talks about. We talk about lies like they're events, discrete moments. You said a thing, it was false. That's the lie. And if nobody found out, the lie is contained, over, done with. But that's not how it works. Every lie you tell, you have to maintain, even the ones nobody ever challenged, especially those ones, because the lie doesn't disappear. It sits in the background of your thinking, requiring constant low-level management. You have to remember what version of events you've told to whom. You have to monitor for moments when the story might unravel. You have to subtly steer conversations away from territory where the truth might surface uninvited. This is expensive. Not in any way you can measure in hours or money, but in attention, in energy, in the gradual narrowing of what you can freely talk about and who you can freely be around. And more than that, each lie draws a line between who you are and who you appear to be. The further those two things drift, the more effort you have to spend managing the gap. The less you can afford to be truly known by anyone. The lonelier the center of your life becomes, even when the outside of it looks full. There's a word for this state. You probably know it from the inside, even if you haven't named it. It's the vague discomfort of having a secret, the mild background anxiety of a life that doesn't fully cohere, the exhaustion of performing, a version of yourself rather than simply being, when The truth would have cost you something in the moment it was spoken. The lie cost you something every day after. Which is the worst deal? The accumulation. Lies pile up. That is not a metaphor. It is a description of how they actually behave. Each one creates the conditions for the next. The small lie that protected a comfortable fiction requires a second lie when someone gets close to the edge of it. The second requires a third. The architecture becomes complex, load-bearing, interconnected, until the whole thing has a weight that the original small moment never implied. Think about relationships destroyed not by one dramatic betrayal, but by years of small omissions. The version of yourself you presented at the beginning that you've had to maintain ever since. The things you agreed with to keep the peace that have now calcified into positions you don't actually hold. The person you love who has, over time, fallen in love with a version of you that required careful construction. And now you can't afford to let them see the original. That's not a small problem. That's the shape of a life. Think about organizations built on cultures of comfortable dishonesty, where nobody says what they actually think, where bad news doesn't travel upward, where the honest conversation that would fix the problem never gets had because everyone has learned that honesty is a career risk. And then the problem that could have been solved in a meeting becomes a crisis that reshapes the company. Think about the argument in a marriage that finally erupts over something trivial, something that, on the surface, makes no sense to fight about. What actually erupted is 5 years of things that went unsaid because they were uncomfortable to say. The trivial thing wasn't the problem. It was just the moment the pile got too heavy. Lies don't stay where you put them. They expand into the space around them and pull everything close enough into their orbit. The comfortable silence. Now let's scale this up, because everything we've said about individual honesty applies with terrifying precision to the way societies handle truth. There is a growing and increasingly organized belief that certain things are too dangerous to be said out loud. That speech itself, the wrong kind of speech from the wrong kind of people, is a form of harm, and that protecting people from that harm justifies preventing it, restricting it, removing it from platforms, creating the conditions in which it cannot be heard. This is presented as protection, as compassion, as the responsible management of a complex and fragile world. I want to take that argument seriously, because it deserves to be taken seriously. Before explaining why it is so deeply and consequentially wrong, the argument is essentially this: some ideas are hateful. Hateful ideas cause harm. Therefore, reducing the circulation of hateful ideas reduces harm. It sounds clean. It sounds logical. It even sounds kind, but it contains a fatal assumption that the hatred itself disappears when the speech is removed. It doesn't. The anger, the grievance, the sense of being unseen or unheard or dismissed, that doesn't go anywhere when you take away the platform. It goes underground. It stops being visible. It stops being accessible to counter-argument, to correction, to the simple social friction of someone disagreeing with it out loud and explaining why. And here is the mechanism that nobody who advocates for censorship seems willing to engage with honestly. Suppressed speech doesn't weaken, it ferments. What grows in the dark? History is not subtle on this point. The beliefs and movements that have done the most damage in human history have not, as a rule, been destroyed by being prevented from speaking. They have been destroyed by being engaged, argued with, challenged, exposed in the light of public reason, and rejected. And they have grown strongest precisely when they were driven underground and became, in the minds of their followers, forbidden knowledge. The truth that powerful people don't want you to hear. There is nothing more seductive than a forbidden idea. The moment you tell someone they are not allowed to think something, you have made that thing more compelling than it would ever have been in open air. And here is the other half of this that gets almost no attention. When someone has a genuine grievance, a real frustration, a legitimate anger about something that has actually gone wrong, and that grievance is met not with engagement, but with dismissal, with silencing, with being called hateful for having it, what happens? The anger doesn't dissolve, it intensifies. Because now there are two grievances, the original one and the new one, that they weren't allowed to speak about it, that the system decided they were too dangerous to be heard, that their reality was classified as hate speech and removed from the conversation. You do not calm legitimate anger by telling people they are not allowed to express it. You make it hotter, more justified, more personal. You confirm every suspicion that the people in charge of the conversation are not interested in the truth, only in maintaining the comfortable fiction. And then you wonder why the extremes get more extreme. Truth as the corrective. Here is what open speech actually does. And I mean real open speech, the kind that includes voices you find uncomfortable, arguments you disagree with, expressions of anger that make you want to look away. It exposes things to air, and in the air, two things happen. First, the unjustified hatreds, the ones built on misinformation, on bad reasoning, on fear that has been misdirected, get corrected. Not always immediately, not always cleanly, but the person who says something false in a genuine public forum runs the risk of being answered, of having the error named, of someone presenting evidence that challenges the assumption. That process is imperfect and often messy, but it works. It has always worked better than the alternative. Second, the justified grievances, the real ones, the ones rooted in something that has actually happened, get acknowledged. And acknowledgement is enormously, disproportionately powerful. People who feel heard do not need to escalate. People whose anger has been genuinely seen and engaged with do not need to find more extreme ways of expressing it. The conversation is the safety valve. Remove the valve, and the pressure builds until it finds another way out. This is not a theory. This is the observed behavior of human beings in communities across history. You want to reduce dangerous speech? Create the conditions in which speech can happen, where it can be challenged and corrected and engaged with by people who will push back honestly. The answer to bad speech has always been more speech, not less. Not policed silence, not managed conversation. The open, imperfect, sometimes ugly process of people saying what they actually think and being answered by people who actually disagree. That process is not comfortable, but it is true. And truth, given enough time and enough air, has a way of winning. The cost and the worth. Let's come back to the personal, because everything starts there. Telling the truth is not always easy. I want to be clear that this is not a video about how simple it all is. If you just decide to be honest, it is not simple. It costs something real. It costs you the moment, the immediate comfort of having said the thing that went down well rather than the thing that was accurate. It costs you the approval of people who preferred the comfortable version. It costs you the peace of having let something pass rather than naming it. And sometimes it costs you more than that. Real honesty, the kind that matters, occasionally costs you relationships, opportunities, positions. The world does not always reward the person who says the difficult true thing over the person who says the easy false one. That is genuinely the case, and pretending otherwise helps nobody. But here is what truth gives you that no lie ever can. It gives you yourself, intact, coherent, the same person in every room you walk into, because you've said the same things in all of them. It gives you relationships that are real, built on what you actually are, rather than what you constructed, which means they can bear weight when weight is needed. It gives you a mind that is not divided against itself, not quietly occupied with the management of what you've said to whom, and it gives you a kind of peace that the comfortable lie structurally cannot provide. Not happiness. The truth doesn't guarantee happiness, but something more durable than happiness. The solidity of a life that coheres, that you can look at honestly and recognize. The truth is hard. The lie is harder, paid out over a longer time. And when everybody tells it, When a culture decides that honesty is something worth protecting, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it produces friction, even when it makes the room harder to be in, everyone gets smarter. Everyone gets more accurate. The problems that only exist because nobody said the true thing get solved. The extremes that only grew because the honest conversation was forbidden come back toward the center. We all get better. That's not optimism. That's the mechanism. So, tell the truth, not because it's easy, not because it will always be rewarded, not because the world has arranged itself to welcome honesty with open arms. It often hasn't. Tell the truth because the lie is a debt you will pay for longer than you expect, in ways you did not anticipate, with interest you did not agree to. Tell the truth because the person you become in the telling of lies is not the person you want to be. And that person doesn't arrive all at once. They arrive one small, convenient, apparently harmless dishonesty at a time. And by the time you notice them in the mirror, a lot of ground has been given. Tell the truth in your conversations, in your relationships, in the things you say and don't say. Tell it even when the room would prefer the comfortable version. Tell it especially then, and demand it from the world around you. Resist the comfortable silence. Push back on the managed conversation. Insist on the open forum where ideas get challenged and corrected, and where grievances, even uncomfortable, ones to get heard rather than removed, because a world where only certain truths are permitted is not a safer world. It is a more dishonest one. And dishonesty at scale does exactly what it does in a single life. It accumulates, it ferments, it produces consequences that nobody planned for and everybody has to live inside. The truth is not always kind in the moment, but it is always, always more kind than the alternative. Start there, with yourself, or today just one true thing. Go out and change the world.